Curtis, welcome. Thank you very much for working with me on this class to help early career researchers get their start and build a long career by getting grants funded.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thanks. What I thought we'd start with is your writing experience and your writing process. Everybody has things they've tried that work for a time or work now, and I wanted to hear from you.
I think for me, it changes over time based on what I have going on in life. You know, when I was in grad school, I had a lot of time to write, and I could carve out 6-7 hours and just write. Now in teaching, I don't have that kind of time, so I have to carve out shorter blocks, and I think that varies on, people and their attention spans and whatever they feel like they can do and can accomplish. And I think for me, the big part is less about getting into the writing and more about ending my time. So I try, if I'm writing for a short period of time, and I know I'm not going to come back to it for a while, I need to leave myself prepared, set up for the next time. So I'm always giving myself notes, like next time I want to start here, or here's kind of where my thought was when I ended, and I want to move forward from this point. So that by the next time I do have a chunk that I can sit down and write, I'm not spending half of that time going back through and like, what was I talking about in this space? What was going on here and there? So I think that's the biggest thing I've learned as a writer throughout my life is to make sure when I use that structured time to not run up to the very end writing out the last words, but to give myself a period of like, all right, stop, reflect on what I did, think about where I want to go from here, and leave myself notes so that when I come back to it in a week, maybe a month, I can actually know where I was.
That is great wisdom. That is really great wisdom, especially as you say, it's different when literally every day you're working on a section and you open it up and you know exactly where you were because you just were there. Mm-hmm. But when you're squeezing it in between preparing for exams, grading things, sometimes it's weeks and you can actually not remember what you were doing or why you made these decisions. And sometimes I've even undone decisions that I've already done, not realizing it because you kind of have to start all the way around.
Absolutely. Too many times I've started over because I hadn't set myself up. And had I just left a few notes, taken 15 minutes at the end to reflect on what I'd done and to leave myself these kind of breadcrumbs for the next time, it would have been a tremendous help in saving time for me. And you're right. We all have different periods of life. And so it might be a month, right? Or it could be even longer before I have time because of teaching or grading and these sorts of things to come back to that. And so it's really important to leave myself those cues or else I'll spend all of my dedicated time trying to determine what it was I was trying to say or to go back through and sometimes just start over.
Okay, that's great. Question, do you, when you do have this focused period of time, do you say, I'm going to write this section, or I have a short outline of these 4 paragraphs and that's what I'm doing today? Or are you back in it sort of making your choices, like today feels like a methods day, today feels like a innovation section day? How do you decide what to be working in?
Yeah, I'm probably more of the latter, to where I'm kind of seeing how I feel. And it could be also related to what I've been thinking about. I know when writing blocks are coming. And so I let my kind of brain, when I have space, to just kind of think through things. And maybe I'm more interested in methods at that particular time. And so I'll try to think about things that I want to write about there. So I don't have that kind of structure. I would find that maybe it would limit me because I might get to that and be like, oh, I need to write this section and I've got nothing. right? So I try not to give those kind of rigid parameters for my process, but other people need that as well. And I think that's the important thing, is that we all approach writing differently, and we need to be comfortable with ourselves and with our process to be like, it's okay. And it's also okay sometimes when you sit down and you have nothing, and to just try to write. And to be able to deviate from your plan, be like, okay, I'm not here today, but let me go just kind of write in this section, or put these thoughts down, just to have that process.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. When I was in graduate school, there was this very accomplished researcher who actually went on to win the Nobel Prize while I was in school, which was very exciting. And he taught during the academic year, and there were graduate students all around, and he's very busy. And he said, you know what, I'm not in the headspace to write, to actually do my great creative work. So what he allocated during his content, his course time, was lit reviews, reading other manuscripts, finding things in the literature, trying to piece together parts of arguments, but basically laying all the groundwork. And then every summer he went to his beautiful, lake home. His wife happened to be an editor, but that was his allocated writing time. And over a very long career, he put out, many important scholarly works. But he gave himself permission to let the job fit the time allotted. It just made sure that the day actually came that he did the writing. But I agree with that. Sometimes, although if you talk to our writing teacher, he'll say, that perfect time to write that you're waiting for, that time will never come. I also agree with that. Sometimes, to me, my discipline can be like, this is the section I'm working on. Like, I need a draft of this section. Sure. Ugly, beautiful, doesn't matter. But like, not letting myself off the hook for that section is just a little game I play with myself to like help nudge me along when it's something, when I'm not feeling it.
Yeah, that's good. I agree too. I think a lot of times when we talk about writing, people think about this kind of formal thing that they have to do, whether it's a grant or a journal article. But I think what your professor was kind of getting at that is also important is we do have these small windows where we can do more informal sorts of things. And maybe it's we have time to, think about this piece of a lit review. And even if we're not even writing a draft, we're just getting notes down. As that person did, to set up when a time is coming in your life where you have, at least hopefully have more time, right, in the summers or whatever, if you're on a heavy teaching load, or that's important. So I wouldn't say that you need to just wait, not do any writing, and then all of a sudden when you've got a month, turn into it. But to take those moments to have structured times and not put so much pressure on you, or I don't, where I have to have a draft even done. It can be really informal, of notes or just getting stuff out of my head onto a document, with the idea that I'm going to use this to set up this more focused time that I know that I have coming.
Yes, I agree with you. You said two things that I wanted to comment on. One is, the downside of sort of planful writing in a big block, whether it's your summer or like that magical Friday or whatever day, you're like, that's the day I'm gonna write. And then really it's too much unstructured time. You get confused, you start doing literature, you start doing you end up spinning all around, even though you are working on your scholarship, very little forward motion happens. And I will say I've seen this with graduate students, or, often for students, you have to shrink the chunks. You say, you're going to do this part, come back at 11 o'clock, and then we'll talk about it. And then at 1 o'clock, you're going to come back with the next thing. So you're sort of giving yourself a little more small chunks with expectations of some kind of productivity out of it. So anyway, I agree. Sometimes you just, you kind of have to be the boss of yourself and like, you're going to do this today.
That's right. Yeah. And to also give yourself, I find that most people who have really structured writing they're pretty good at keeping those structures. They're less good about forgiving themselves if things go off the rails. And if they go off once, it can tend to continue to go off. And so you can get into kind of the spiral of, well, I lost that day, so let me, I'm just going to keep losing these days. So I think there's a balance there of trying to create the space, and we all should, for writing, to create space for writing, even if it's a really short window. But to also recognize that life happens sometimes, and to give ourselves a little bit of grace there.
Yes, absolutely. I will say one mistake I've seen people make is things happen, you miss your window, and then it happens again and again and again. And there's all kinds of guilt and shame with that. And then you say, well, now I'm going to take my Christmas break and I'm going to use every day to write all day, every day, which is not realistic. And, it's a little bit like missing a workout, and instead of like, you're going to run 2 miles, 2 miles, 2 miles. Now, okay, I missed all the training. I think I'll go do a marathon on the weekend. Like, come on, it won't be possible, or you're going to hurt yourself. Right. So I agree with you. You have to be, supportive of yourself. And I think when you miss certain planned writing goals, really, question yourself, what happened? How can I make it better the next time? You can't get it back. You can't make up for it the next time. All you can do is with your next session, what could you do to make it further protected, further productive?
Yeah, that's really great to think about the reflection of why something didn't happen like you wanted, to take that time to think through it. And that'll help. It'll help keep you on track, and also help you, if certain things kind of tend to bump up, to be able to plan. Maybe you need to change your structured time, or change the amount of time, or the time of day, and that sort of reflection can help with that process.
Right. The other thing I'll just reflect before we leave this topic, I remember a mentee was, talking to us about their struggles. We were having this conversation, and she said, I just hate to write. I hate everything about writing. I, just on and on about how writing was the most painful, most unpleasant thing she could think to do. And every single time she had to force herself to do it. And the other mentors who were with me we kind of looked at each other like, well, that's like the job. The job of doing research is a lot of writing. You're thinking about things and you're communicating your ideas to a funder. And then luckily you get to do the study if it's funded. And then you're writing to share what happened. So, I would really contemplate the possibility. This is a skill that can get easier and you can get better at it 100%. But if you wish you had a magic wand to take away the writing forever, I would seriously contemplate what part of the research process would you like to be in? And maybe it's being a co-investigator with a principal investigator who does the writing and you do some piece of the thing. But the writing is the thing. Curtis, I was hoping you would reflect with me about working in small institutions, small colleges where there isn't a big medical center, lots of federal grants, lots of principal investigators with experience with federal grants, when people are just trying to get started in their career. I know you've worked at small colleges and big colleges. Could you reflect a little about those challenges?
Sure. I think one of them is related to what we were just talking about, time. So in small colleges, the workloads are not set up really for research. They're set up typically for teaching and for service work to help with the institution. And so those who are trying to do research, and especially research that lends itself toward grant seeking and grant writing, finding the time in their own lives to be able to do that is a challenge. The other side of that challenge, or the second part of that challenge, is that the institutions themselves don't incentivize that time. So it's not protected. There's not a sense where they'll give you protected time necessarily, because the emphasis is typically in small schools on teaching. So a lot of folks who enter into those spaces just struggle to find times in their days and even their summers to even have the space to think about writing a grant. And they also know that the institutional resources aren't really set up to help them with that. In fact, they may in some ways discourage them from it because they really need classes filled, and it requires them to maintain those loads. So when I've watched researchers who are trying to get grants, there's always the sections in the grant, especially federal grants, about institutional support. And those are very difficult for them to write. Not necessarily that they feel unsupported, but they don't know where to go find things. And there are things you have to know about your institutional structures. And that's often left up to them rather than, say, an Office of Grants and Contracts. It's left for the researcher to not only come up with a fundable idea and to write specific aims, but also to do all that kind of lifting to make sure that those sections are written. And then sometimes in some institutions, even getting commitment or letters of support from the institution itself can be a challenge, because many researchers who are also teaching a lot know that if they're successful in the grant, there's a portion of their workload that has to be dedicated to that grant. What that means practically is that those schools are going to have to find different teachers for those classes that may not be there. So they're looking at adjuncts, and they have all this struggle to find, okay, so how do we cover these classes now? And so that's difficult even at the grant writing stage, because they know that's coming. And so getting support from their institutions on the front end can be difficult because of those needs to be in the classroom, or perhaps even clinical practice as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. The parallels with academic medicine are high, even though, for instance, at the University of Colorado, this is a big research based public university with a large medical center with 6 schools and colleges across all of the health sciences. There are many resources, many investigators to get help. The pressure for time is more from the clinical programs than from teaching per se, because relatively speaking, that there's a small number of students relative to a very large number of faculty, but the burdens are real for the clinical enterprise, and it does underpin much of what happens here. And yet, you're going to write a grant, you're going to try to buy out some of your time to be dedicated to the research. Well, if you're in a small clinical practice, whether it's an oncology service or a burn unit or name, the more specialized usually the groups get small. You've got 2 partners, 3 partners, 4 partners. You get that grant, they're taking care of your patients. They're the ones working the evenings and weekends. They're the ones. And so, to some extent, you say, hey, I'm just the researcher here. It's the boss's problem to fill those gaps. But no, actually, they're going to give it back to you. And just pretend you got the grant, which sounds like it's all gravy. Now, some of your partners might not be very happy with you because all that clinical work just got put on them. So, there's a lot of similarities in the time and the the focus aspect of things. Now, there's no question a university like this has extensive resources for grant writers. And yet you still have to know where to find it, and you need to know how to navigate it. But it does exist. It does exist.
Right. So, yeah, I think that's a difference. The other thing that I think in terms of resources is that it seems to me that at a large research university, there's a lot of critical mass of, major thinkers, major scientists that might be, a hallway away. And in small colleges, that's often not the case. And so building a network and building mentors, I know you talk a lot about mentor teams and developing strong mentor teams. Building those can be really challenging at small colleges just because there's not that many people and the emphasis there is not on research. And so it can be really challenging for them to find those mentors that value research in the way that you want to value it, and to find more than one, right? You have to build a team of researchers. And so you're often drawing back on wherever you might have done your graduate work on those mentors, or you're tapping into your professional networks of people that you probably see once or twice a year. And I think that's probably a difference where here you do have to seek them out. You still have to find them. But it seems like there's more opportunity perhaps to find those people at a place, a large research institution versus a small college.
I agree with that. Sometimes people here at the University of Colorado will say, we need more training, we need more researchers, we need more. Yes, we do. And yet we have so much. The resources here are extensive for early career, mid-career, senior researchers. And it's just not that hard to connect. And I agree with you. I mean, you always have to be intentional. We always recommend faculty make networking part of their professional development. And whether you have to put a reminder in your calendar or some other game you play with yourself, whether it's going to be once a week, you're going to send an email to someone, once a month, you're going to go to lunch with somebody or take somebody to coffee, to connect, to find out what's going on, to ask for further contact. Like, that is good for you as a professional. And you're right. If you're at a small place, geographically distanced from other big places, you're going to have to be that much more intentional, because it'll be perhaps really make it a point to getting to regional or national conferences, or use remote messaging. You're going to have now, in the post-COVID days, we do Zoom and you can make meetings with people. It is really, really valuable, whether it's for a senior type mentor or simply a collaborator or co-author.
Yeah, I agree. It's a necessity, and many people who are successful at small colleges find a way to do that. And I do think that they would think that it's a challenge to do so in ways that would be different than maybe at a large research university, maybe like they did their graduate work in. But if they're driven to do this sort of research, then those who are successful find a way to do it and work through those hurdles. But it is important, I think, to recognize that it is a hurdle, and it's a part of a process that maybe the work they have to do there is more than others, and that's important to note, I think.
Yes. The other thing, just thinking about what you're saying, if one of these early career researchers who are at a place where there aren't a lot of mentors, and they're going to have to reach out to people, cold call, or say, yeah, I'm a friend of a friend, try to tap your network and keep snowballing. I do think what many early career researchers struggle with is coming to a meeting where they're not in the trainee mode, and they're not like, you're going to help me because I'm a student. If you're coming as a peer, you're an assistant professor, so you are a faculty peer, even if you're going to Dr. Big. You come thinking about what value you bring. You try to have something to share. So maybe you're going to write a position paper that would be a brief report or a commentary about something, and you've identified this person as an author of something related that inspired you, and you would like to invite them to co-author this piece with you. So you're like trying to add value even as you build those relationships, and that does multiple things. It shows people you're serious, shows you can follow through, shows you've done your homework, so it's not, oh, please help me, I'm all alone and I need help. Yeah, that's probably true. But that's kind of how a student would approach. But if you approach as a peer with a milestone to share, it's a lot more well received.
Yeah, I think so. That's good advice. It is sometimes hard to flip that switch from graduate student to peer, especially if the network you're drawing on is the one from graduate school, right? So to turn to approach, say, a dissertation advisor, for example, as now a faculty peer, and to bring something, you're bringing things to the table and you're engaging with that person as a peer, can be a difficult thing, but a necessary thing, as you said, to not just come to them for help and guidance, even if they're a mentor, but to have things to offer in the equation of the research process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go back to writing. Okay. One of the challenges is I become very attached to my sentences. Like, what? At times, I'm really ready to cut, and at times, I just keep nibbling at the edges and you just can't go right in there. Do you have the similar problem, and do you have any strategies?
I think we all have that problem. So I will often tell people, if I'm editing or if I'm teaching a writing kind of class, that before you start messing with formatting or before you start cutting content, look at structure. And what I mean by that is to look at your sentences and to think about whether you could say something with fewer words and say the same thing. And most often, and I find this especially in scientific writing, eliminating passive voice can be a really good way to do that, because instead of saying research was conducted by the team, you could say the team conducted research. And even if you're just cutting 1 to 2 words out of that sentence, it's incremental and it builds over time. So over a few thousand words, you've cut a couple of hundred. And that sometimes is all you really need to find. And so I think just taking a hard look, and I know I'm the same way. I might love the way that sentence looks or feels, but if I have a word limit, I have to make cuts, or someone's going to make them for me. So I would rather do it myself. And that's where I start. And from there, if I've done that and I've gone through and I've made sure that everything is clear and concise, and I'm still over, then you have to take a hard look at your content and start doing kind of triage there. It's like, what is absolutely essential for my audience in this work? But I often find that I don't have to go there, because I can clean up enough of my sentences to say what I want to say, and save several words.
Yes. I agree with that. And sometimes, as you say, I do this in a grant, where you're like just over by a half page and you just go back in and you're like, how can I rework this sentence to make it shorter? But then just suppose it is perfectly written in every way. You have to move content out. That is all. And the game is, what can people live without, right? It's like need and want, right? What is need to know information, and what can an educated non-expert follow along without? Of course, you wish it was all in there, but right.
Yeah, and I think the key there is to make sure, when you're asking that question of need and want, is what does my audience need? Not what I need or want, but is this clear to my audience? Or does my audience need to have this extra information, or is that just something that I'm in love with myself? And if you have to make those hard choices, and that's often the case with word limits, then you have to always, I think, keep your audience in mind about what is it that they need to know to clearly identify the points I'm trying to make and the evidence I'm trying to lay out or the aims that I'm trying to support. And anything else can go, right? If it's not directly related to those things, it can go, and it's okay.
Yes. I want to build on what you're saying, Curtis, because what I see often is when a writer won't trim, because, you think everything's important because it is. And yet, oftentimes, people are overly attached to two things. I could think because I've cut this 100 times or a million times. Either they're overly attached to the rationale. So they're like, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. There's 20 reasons why this is an important research question. Okay. I was like persuaded after 2. Those things are all true. Perhaps you can claim some of that in a background section, or maybe it's just, I don't need to know it. It could be in your, manuscript on the subject, but like, we got it. Move on with me. And the other place I see people going on and on too much is when you get into the absolute minutia, not of the method, not in the section where you're supposed to go into the minutia of the method, but actually you're sort of foreshadowing what's your data set, what's your analysis, and then we're going to specify a variable, and then we have this other technique, and you're actually previewing it too much. This Ames page is not where you're going to tell me really how you're going to do the study. You're going to tell me what we're doing. You're going to give me get me to go along. Back in the approach section is where we need all the details. So sometimes a little too much foreshadowing. And then I understand why people do this, and it's a great opportunity to cut. Sometimes what happens is in the preamble, they say, and we're going to do a study that does this and this and this. And then you get to the specific aims and it says, we're going to do this and this and this. And I go, why did you just tell me that twice? You don't have to tell me what you're going to tell me. People say that for verbal presentations. You don't have to do that in a document. Say it well once is enough.
Absolutely true. I think there's a concept like strategic redundancy that really works in vocal presentation that you just don't need as much of in written. The other thing I'll add is sometimes it's hard to see that. And so having an educated non-expert read it, especially with an eye toward editing and clarity, can be a really good tool. Maybe not someone on your mentor team or someone that's not involved in the grant. Find someone else who's willing to read your work, who may not be an expert in your field, and have them point out where things are not clear, or maybe you need a little more here, but maybe you need a lot less there because it is redundant because you said it in a previous section and you didn't need to. So using that tool as well, having a good editor can help as well.
Yeah, I want to build on what you said. There is this very interesting paradox of people, early career researchers, who have a very strong content mentorship team. So for instance, there's a big group that does cardiovascular outcomes research. There's a big neurology group. There was a big, geriatric research group. Like several people strong. And they read each other's stuff. They listen to each other present. And they struggle to write to an educated non-expert in a shocking way. You think they have all this mentorship. Well, everybody knows the story. Everybody's interested in the same thing. They're going to fill in the gaps for you, and they're going to be fascinated by every little detail just like you. And so you come and these, somebody who's not them reads it and you're just like, oh my gosh, what's happening? You need somebody who's not in your group and not in your area to read it and to help you see what people who are not like you think. Because that's the typical reviewer, right? It's you and me for a physician scientist. And we don't know what you're talking about. So you got to break it down.
Exactly. That not only helps you find a good editor, but it also helps you write for an audience better, because that person is likely, the educated non-expert is likely your audience. And so finding that person not only helps you in editing, but also helps you tailor things toward more of the actual audience that might be reviewing your work.
Yes. Okay, now I'm going to tell you something. This is true for me. It probably is true for somebody else. One of the things that I see when you're editing and editing and editing, and somehow this story is still muddled, it's actually not the words on the page. It actually is not the sentences or the paragraphs. It is that you have not reached clarity on what you are trying to say, and therefore you can't just say it. So this is one of my biggest problems. And for me, it's why I have to work it out in my mind. And then I can get to it pretty quickly when I'm struggling and being slow. It almost always is that I don't know exactly what I want to say. When my ideas are clear, I can put it down. And so sometimes when I'm like, well, I just need to start writing. And what you're doing is you're writing yourself in circles because you haven't forced yourself to make some hard decisions. So for me, I also think, besides driving into your passive voice or, how many details you're giving or how many citations, it's also like, are your ideas clear to you? That's like the necessary step. It's not sufficient to make a beautiful draft, but it is a required step to get to a beautiful draft.
Absolutely. I think that we writers all kind of write, and I had the same problem of writing in circles and being muddled, and I read it and I'm like, I don't really know what I was trying to do there. But to go kind of back to earlier parts of our conversation, this is one way I use informal writing. If I don't have a lot of time, I use that to get ideas out, and then I can look back over those and begin to, okay, now there's that. What is the nugget I'm trying to get at here? And how am I trying to express that? And is it clear in my own mind? And I think you're right. It's important to be able to distill what it is we want to say really succinctly. Like, this is the point. And if you can't do that, then whatever draft you've written shouldn't be your final draft. You need to be able to be there and be like, I know exactly what it is. I know the point that I'm trying to make, and I don't need to kind of weave around it anymore. And once you're there, then I think you're ready to go back to whatever draft you're on and be like, okay, now I can start to make sense of this and to clarify things and get rid of things because I know exactly what it is I want to say now.
Yes, I think it's almost like a two-state problem. One is, I know exactly what I'm trying to say and I just can't get the words out to say it. That is a distinct problem from, what am I saying? I'm like writing, and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've had both things. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. It's a writing technique, and it actually helps clarify your thinking. We've done where, have somebody write an unstructured abstract or a paragraph of any kind, and, say 250 words, and you do it on your computer so you can have the word processor, and you count the words, and then you assign people to cut it in half, and then you get down, you basically make people keep significantly cutting until they can have up to 12 words, which is quite a long sentence. But can you say what that paragraph was supposed to be in this one rambling sentence? And if that's pretty much it, you've managed to do it, then build your paragraph back up based on that. And often it's like, oh, this was the thing, and now I can build it back. It's actually very challenging. And once you do it a few times, you go, oh yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
That's a great exercise that all of us, I think, could do more often. If we need to put it in more today's parlance, get it to a tweet, right? I needed distilled to a tweet. And if you can do that, then you can start to build back. Because once you've done that, you can start to build back very specifically and clearly. And if you've got it down to that 12 words, you know where you need to build it from there. It's like, oh, okay, here's what I'm trying to say, and now I can add back and build back.
Yes.
It's a good exercise. We should all do that with our drafts, I think, myself included.
It would be very painful, painful to do it every time. The other little technique I use, this is more for manuscripts than grants. I always start at the back. We could talk about manuscripts for a long time, but I will, as a point of discipline, I will write the abstract. And it is hard. And the reason I do it before I have the tables, but I haven't really written the manuscript, is because I need to remind myself in very few words what exactly this paper is about. What is the main result? What is the take-home point? What is the purpose? And oftentimes being forced into that highly structured, very word-limited structure clarifies things a lot. You go, okay, yeah, that's what this paper is going to be about. And for me, it does, by clarifying what it is, it takes away what it's not, and it helps me move forward on a draft. So, with every grant, there's an abstract. And may I say, again, speaking for myself, it's almost always one of the last things we do. We just take a copy of the Ames page and just start cutting, and you slap this thing together. But the truth is, it's one of the first things a reviewer sees, and it really behooves you to do a little brain damage and really try to make it tight and accurate and precise about what this whole thing is going to be about.
I think yours is the best approach and one I should probably use more when I write manuscripts, because you're right. Not only does it help organize you, it's also the first thing they see. And I know personally that I've treated abstracts as an afterthought. And I think many of us have. But if we could take the time to kind of go through that process of clarifying what it is exactly we're trying to do in this grant or in this manuscript in abstract form, I think that could be a powerful tool to go back to. Oh yeah, right, I was doing this.
What did I say I was going to do?
And also, this isn't quite that. So that goes somewhere else, right, to another manuscript or another grant application.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Curtis.
My pleasure.